Sometimes you just love to hate a villain, or an evil character is so well defined and clearly has so much to them, you need to take a moment and at least talk about their nefarious plan from top to bottom. Doesn't mean you agree with it, doesn't mean you actually wanted them to win, but occasionally these Thanoses of the world posit some moral quandaries, scenarios, or philosophies worth talking about. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 complex video game villains who almost deserve to win. Number 8. The Elusive Man, Mass Effect 2. Let's talk about the Elusive Man of Mass Effect 2, the one before things went notably downhill in Part 3, and the version of the character that sparks the most debate amongst fans, as to whether his mysterious ways were leading somewhere positive, or at least philosophically interesting eventually, or if the character only cared about humanity to a xenophobic degree from the beginning. Because the Elusive Man is supposed to represent an extension of Mass Effect 1's core ethos, exploring where humanity belongs in a wider galaxy of aliens, and the questions that surround species wide representation. Things would get far more humanity good, all other races bad in Mass Effect 3, as BioWare historically ballsed up a lot of plot points. But this one step ahead villain does give Shepard some great conversational showdowns, with you as a player trying to figure out precisely how vast the Elusive Man's reach truly is, whilst occasionally admiring what feels like a lifetime of planning. With the seeds of indoctrination from evil alien force the Reapers present across Mass Effect 2 regardless, this midpoint of the trilogy still gave us one of gaming's greatest villains, with a chaotic mind many fans wish they could have picked apart more. The deserved part of the video's title here entirely relates to how the Elusive Man's character was written overall, and the possibility of an optional ending we never got. Number 7. Dr. Doom, Marvel Ultimate Alliance. Dr. Victor Von Doom is one of the most iconic villains of all time, and his inclusion as the chief antagonist of 2006's Marvel Ultimate Alliance was always going to make a splash. In the game, Dr. Doom teams up with some of the biggest baddies from the Marvel universe, creating the Masters of Evil. He then acquires the Twilight Sword from Mephisto's realm, creates an army of super soldiers which run riot over Asgard, produces clones of the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Captain America, and Thor, before defeating, capturing, and draining the god Odin of all his power. By the time you're finally able to take him down, Doom is capable of splitting the entire universe apart. Seldom few villains can point to just how much effort and how much reward Dr. Doom accrues across the course of Ultimate Alliance. There's no big moral point or much in the way of logic to what he does, but when you're up against the most powerful being in the universe, sometimes it's worth saying, fair play mate, maybe you can have this. Number 6. N, Pokemon Black and White. One of the biggest moral quandaries surrounding the Pokemon universe has always been over how cruel it is for trainers to capture and compete with all those otherwise wild and free animals. It's a topic that's been brought up plenty of times over the years, however never quite as strongly as with Pokemon Black and White. The game's chief antagonist is N, the leader of Team Plasma, and a fierce advocate for Pokemon being kept free. Having grown up in the wild amongst Pokemon, he has the ability to speak to and understand them, and is one of the few opponents whose goals are almost entirely noble. Of course, it's the player's job to show N the naivety of his ways by proving not every human is out to hurt a Pokemon, and that he's in fact being manipulated by his father Getsus to take over the world. Nevertheless, the connection N builds with the Pokemon around him is perhaps the greatest bit of proof that anyone advocating for peace with Pokemon rather than fighting is onto something. Number 5. King Logan, Fable 3. One of the first interactions players have with King Logan in Fable 3 sees the Monarch force them to choose between killing a group of innocent protesters or one of their closest friends. Suffice it to say, Lionhead Studios were not holding back. The elder sibling of the protagonist and hero of Brightwall, Logan is shown to be a tyrannical and oftentimes cruel individual, showing little in the way of empathy for the people that he rules over. However, beneath this hard exterior lies a man who is racked by paranoia and uncertainty surrounding his position. Having encountered a creature known as the Crawler that's been prophesied to destroy Albion from the ground up, Logan embarks on an industrial revolution across the country, believing it's better to die amassing some sort of counterattack rather than giving up and surrendering the nation to such a monster. Over the campaign, you come to replace Logan as the ruler of Albion and are suddenly faced with the same quandary surrounding resources and priorities. Fable 3 is another historically mismanaged final installment with far more haters than fans, and while none of this excuses what Logan did or how they acted, that very first choice is unforgivable. The reveal of a tyrant pressurizing his populace into being a fighting force is, at least on paper, a nuanced talking point and eventual gameplay mechanic that could have been something special. Number 4. Andrew Ryan, BioShock. Quite literally the video game that sparks the most conversations around philosophy, human nature, functioning societies, and everything else, BioShock's deconstruction, critique, and playable framing of Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, at least in terms of exploring objectivism, still gets hotly debated today. In terms of Rapture creator Andrew Ryan, fans of his initial intentions point to how corrupted he became over time, drilling down on the notion of a worker being entitled to the sweat of their brow as something that was only mutated and driven to extremes by an unregulated public across Rapture, and by character Frank Fontaine. That idea of a heavenly society away from the meddling of politics, governance, and especially taxation when you get your first paycheck is something that most players can at least sympathize with to some degree. For Ryan himself, over time his increased paranoia and the brutal means in which he runs the city do lead to his downfall. But somewhere along the way, the prioritizing of who puts in the time and effort getting the payoff is an almost universal quality that many can agree on in some form, before whatever comes next in those various conversations. Number 3. Darth TRAYA. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2 Sith Lords. The Star Wars universe is especially clear-cut when it comes to good guys and bad guys, with those turning to the dark side being presented as anything but worthy of a victory. Thankfully, more recent fare like Andor has delved into the human cost of forming a rebellion within an oppressive system, and this idea of Star Wars grey area was at the forefront of Knights of the Old Republic 2, at least as a talking point. Darth TRAYA presents herself in Sith Lords as a party member named Kreia, acting as the player's mentor throughout the majority of the game, claiming to have a connection with you through the Force. Everything from her look to her beliefs are designed to encourage you to think more about the grey areas surrounding the Force and its potential will, as opposed to the linear good versus bad approach that is usually presented. Rian Johnson would revisit similar territory with Rey and Luke in The Last Jedi's first big explainer scene too, and Darth TRAYA is one of the most interesting characters from the Knights of the Old Republic series, throwing up various interesting talking points about morality that fit very well in an RPG. Not believing in the Force predetermining someone's path, it's understandable why TRAYA took so much issue with such a simple separation between light and dark. A thought-provoking and interesting character in Star Wars history, Darth TRAYA's boss battle leaves many players wondering if the universe would be better without the Force. Number 2. Revolver Ocelot. All of Metal Gear Solid. Hideo Kojima's largely improvised per installment as he went mega franchise has as many plot twists and character swerves as it does nanomachine-powered super soldiers. But at the heart of the whole thing is one character playing every scenario their own way. Revolver Ocelot. Masterminding a plan that spans the entire canon, Ocelot goes from working for the CIA to help Naked Snake retrieve a legacy of shared world funds for the greater good, before Eva takes it to the Chinese, to fulfilling Big Boss's goals of a nation for soldiers and their skill sets without that being forever attached to bloodshed. It's messy as hell and involves Ocelot's actions in earlier Metal Gears being him undercover to get closer to the Patriots and their governing AI network to destroy it, but in the end, provided you agree with Big Boss's ideology, he did have somewhat noble aims. At least, I think that's what Kojima was really going for. And number 1, Pagan Min. Far Cry 4. Having returned to his home country to scatter his mother's ashes, Far Cry 4 sees players take control of AJ Gale, as he joins up with the revolutionary group called the Golden Path, attempting to wrestle back control of the country of Kyrat from antagonistic dictator Pagan Min. Across the game, players have the choice of aligning themselves with two ideologically opposed Golden Path commanders, Amita or Sabal. Depending on who you pick, the country will either slip into a military prison state or a religious cult. Both outcomes also end with the death of innocent child Badra as well. While Min is far from a good guy, also killing civilians and generally being inhuman towards everyone around him except you, the latter is because his plan involves handing the country's rule over to you entirely. In one of the most discussed Easter egg endings of all time, standing still when he asks you to wait for him at the beginning of the game will reveal Min's true intentions, letting you scatter your mother's ashes and get one of the only endings in the game that prevents an otherwise astonishing amount of bloodshed. And those are our picks for various complex video game villains who almost deserve to win. Let me know your favorites down in the comments below, and please subscribe to the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.